This is a webinar series, the CUSI Business Ethics Initiative series that we put on, have been doing since last March, about once every 6 weeks or so, on questions of leadership, public trust, especially in the era of uncertainty that's engulfed us since COVID. And I met a lot of people and talked about a number of things. This one is precipitated by that conversation we had a taste of the very first session. A number of women, especially over the years, both in class and outside in the consulting realm, who are experiencing things that are perhaps difficult for someone like me to fully appreciate or comprehend. So I asked 3 of these women to join us today to talk about what we're titling Never Quite Enough, What Successful Minority Women Wish the Rest of Us Knew. So you all know Sandra, of course, but for recording's sake, she is the Chief Executive Officer of the Women's Resource Center. Zoe Wilson, to my far right, who is the Corporate Compliance Manager at Steelcase, little company down the road you've heard of. And Simi Beg, who is both a physician and finished the Spectrum EMBA program a number of years ago, was in the first one. She is the Division Chief of Hospice Palliative Care at Spectrum. And this whole question of what they wish the rest of us knew has come up in different guises, in different ways over the years. And I thought what I want to do is turn it over to them with either examples or stories of getting to that question of what they wish the rest of us knew. And then we'll have some back and forth in terms of questions and comments that they want to make on this topic. So, Sandra, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll be happy to start. First, thank you for having us join. So it's an honor to be here. Although it's an honor to be here, it's a hard topic to discuss. So I would share, when I think about a summary of how to summarize some of the experiences that I had in the workplace, I'll talk about it from a gender and a race perspective, but I'll also talk about it from a framework of thorns and roses. I'll start with the thorns first. And from a gender perspective, although there's many instances where I can point to, I'll point to one specific one. Working for a very large, prominent nonprofit here. Only female on the executive leadership team. I experienced a number of intended, it wasn't unintended, but it was intended, criticisms and just real combative conversation whenever I would use my voice. And for me, what made that even more difficult, the CEO was a person of color, a male person of color, but who's a person of color. And so for me, having to stand up and be really deliberate about using my voice after coming from a banking industry where I learned to use my voice, it was still very hard being the only one sitting around a large table of men when their CEO doesn't support you really sharing your story and your why and helping the organization to be all it can be. That CEO is no longer with the organization, but it took many years for them to uncover and really unpack how detrimental that was to the organization. I felt that losing me was detrimental to the organization because I brought that element that, and as women, we have to speak about ourselves like that. We don't often speak about, and I had to learn to speak about myself like that.
When you say like that, what can you be more specific?
With confidence, because I know my role was critical to the success of the leader, the C-suite team. And the element of gifts and abilities that I brought to the team helped the organization flourish, as well as the other gentlemen around the table. But that was hard. In many situations, it was not only emotionally but mentally combative. And whenever I would use my voice in ways that our male counterparts did not experience. And so from a racial standpoint, I worked for I was recruited to go to a large regional bank. And what was so difficult there, I was at a great bank that I loved, and that was very supportive of myself, but also very supportive of Black and brown communities within that bank. Very large international bank. And when coming there, one of the first things I was met with, they would say, Sandra, you don't need to put your picture on the welcome letter to our clients, to your clients. But everyone else had, in the past, had their pictures on. They didn't think that our clients would be receptive of me coming in to this division of the bank after I just left commercial and business banking from this other bank. The other piece is that I actually went to leadership, to my supervisor, seeking out leadership development opportunities, and I was denied, and I was denied, and I was denied. And I later learned that those same leadership development opportunities I had asked for, they were allowing junior bankers, white females, to go into those leadership development programs. And I wasn't able to go into those leadership development programs. So there was a number of, and I questioned, why did you leave such a great place that you were at? But I would like to think that my footprint that I left there, and using my voice and not being stereotyped, made a difference, but it was a very, very hard and difficult time for me. I cried many times in the bathroom alone, and I hate sharing that because we try to be very tough, but I did, and it was very difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to start really by reading a poem and then sharing a story. It's a short poem. It's titled "Won't You Celebrate With Me" by Lucille Clifton. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. I think what I wish, and I'm really speaking to people who are on a journey of DE&I discovery. There's a Navajo proverb that says, "It is not possible to wake the person pretending to be asleep." So I'm not talking to that group of people. I'm talking to people who are not pretending to be asleep, who know that they're on a journey. I just want to emphasize how exhausting it is to remain whole through experiences like the ones Sandra shared. So I have a really dramatic story that I can share, but I'd like to also explain how I think it plays out less dramatically, especially over this last year. The dramatic story was working with someone for years and years in a leadership setting. When our particular organization ran into, when it came to the surface that there were racial inequities in our organization, she really worked to befriend me as she started reading books and going to conferences and things of that nature. And eventually, last year, invited me and my family to her home. Without my knowledge or my consent or my ability to say, I'll go along with this experiment, I learned that we were, to our detriment, invited to prove a point in her marriage that she would invite Black people into her home, knowing that her spouse was vehemently opposed to having Black people in his home. So we get there and come to realize that this man does not want us in his home. So that's the dramatic example of being invited into harm by someone who has good intentions. The less dramatic example are the book clubs that happened in many organizations in West Michigan, all over the country, where leaders, and by leaders I mean white people, said, you know, we feel like we need to do something, and yet we don't feel like we're educated. We need to educate ourselves. We don't feel prepared. We're not sure what to do, so let's read a book. We'll have white people in class. We'll have, in this book club, we'll have black people and other people of color. And then inevitably, I heard from friends all over this community and across the country that when it came time to discuss the book, to a person, the leader said something like, well, I'm not sure I agree with this book, written by a black scholar who had to prove every single word in order to, that they had to say to get that PhD. So the duplicity of saying, I need more education, picking up a book by an expert, and then saying you don't agree based on feelings, and certainly not the rigor that that PhD had to produce. And then what that models to everyone in the room, to the white people in that room who are ambitious and aspire to be leaders, they've just learned how to invite people in and be able to say, well, I tried, I invited, you know, I tried to learn, I invited these people, and then dismiss what you don't like, what's uncomfortable, and then model to black people needing to remain quiet or else suffer constant injury. So if there was one thing I wanted to share to those people who are trying to learn and educate themselves, be very careful when you invite people of color into your learning. Please be very careful and cognizant of what you're inviting them into, and try to be careful not to invite them into more harm.
I love that Navajo proverb. I had not heard that before, and it just rings so true. You know, when I can only speak for myself, right? I'm an expert at seeing. I know her very well. That's me. But I'm going to share what my thoughts are, and again, not speaking for every woman of color, not speaking for anybody but me. You know, I mean, I'll just share with you a story. This was the first week of January, and as you all know, I take care of patients in end of life, and I go to where they are. I go into their homes or into the facilities or the hospital, wherever they are, and I just love what I do. It's my calling. You know, it was the end of the first week of January, and I had a patient that was quite symptomatic, and there was a lot of medical issues that were going on. So the nurse that I work with, she and I were talking about it, and I said, you know what, let's just go out and see him together. You know, we can kind of see what's going on. And she said, well, I got to tell you that this family, that she had been seeing this family for, you know, several visits. She said after the 6th of January, this family took out their Confederate flag decor. So that's what you're going to walk into. Oh, okay. And she said, should I tell them who the physician is that's going to be coming? And thought about it for a second, and I said, do we do that to every patient? Do we tell them that the physician that you're going to be seeing looks like this, has a name that's, I mean, we don't. So no, let's just go. And this was way out in Ionia, so I had a good 40-minute drive as I'm driving out there to just think about what it is that I'm going to encounter. And I've done this before. I had a patient who had a swastika tattoo, so this is not the first time. But this felt really, really heavy, particularly after knowing what happened on January 6th. It was a message, right? This family took out this decor after that to send a message. There was just no way around that conclusion. Anyway, when I got there, the nurse who's not a woman of color, she's just a lovely person. We went in there, and I have a kind of methodology to take care of patients to help, check my biases and check my own subjective input, because I'm human too. So I kind of use that methodology and it works well. And initially the family was stunned. It was kind of, I chuckled in my head because when I walked in, I thought, boy, what I wouldn't give to hear your thoughts, because they did not expect me. And I just pretended not to notice, and I went on with my visit the way I normally do. And the visit went well. The family was very appreciative, very, very gracious, just, up and down, thank you, thank you. And normally when I am able to help a family, I leave feeling good. I leave feeling like I did what I was supposed to do. I did my part to make this world a little bit better. But I didn't feel that way at all. I felt heavy and I felt sad. And I thought, boy, this went really well. There was nothing terribly aggressive other than the Confederate flag decor. But they didn't say anything. They weren't disrespectful. Why do I feel terrible? For a moment I thought I should ask them and say, hey, what is this about? But I didn't, I didn't want to make it about something else other than caring for their dying loved one. So I didn't, and when we got to the car, the nurse that I was working with, she asked me, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. I said, are you okay? And she was like, well, I think so. And that was it. We didn't talk more about that. And again, 40-minute drive on the way home. And I was thinking, boy, that was really hard. And it wasn't that I felt unsafe. I was thinking about what was making this so hard. And what I want to say is that sometimes it takes a lot of energy to be whole.
I love those companies that have policies and programs in place that are introduced into these companies that will help ensure that they are helping families, and it's just not women, it could be men as well, but helping families to be present at work while also be present with their families. But what happens is with a lot of Black women, especially, or women of color, or women of color as a whole, they are very afraid to often speak up and say that they have these issues or they have a need for support because they're afraid of losing their jobs. So they're in a position where they're silenced and they're not able to use their voice because the company doesn't offer the ability for them to, that open line of communication, that authenticity that's available, that is available in a very small company, not small companies, but a very small group of companies that are doing that. And I would love to see more companies be able to have those type of policies around there and create an environment where women are free to use their voice and share how it impacts themselves and their families.
Yeah, I'd acknowledge that even this morning, I had the jitters because, coming here and speaking so openly, even though I know it's important, doesn't feel safe, right? And at the same time, I balance that with the responsibility to carry on the legacy or the torch of those who've helped me, the Randall Jelks and Rayanne Booker and Jackie Fields, people who made a way, who stuck their necks out to make it easier for the next generation. When you hear an employee or a group of employees saying the same things over and over again, people do that when they don't feel heard. So make sure that you're asking, what will it take for you to feel heard, right? What do I need to do to demonstrate that I hear what you're saying?
Boy, you both are just giving me so much to think about. I love hearing that. I think it's really, if I were to say what do I want people to hear is know that there's an experience that is not like yours. That experience exists for people who look like us or even others. that experience, you may not know the impact of it or the details of it, but know that there is a different experience than yours that is real, it's legitimate, it's authentic, and sometimes it's hard. That's not to say that, like you said, it's all thorns. You know, there's been a lot of people that have collaborated, have worked together to I don't want to say help me, but that was a part of it. We always stand on the shoulders of other people. That's so true. But again, as you remember from my story, that extra weight sometimes is a lot. And just acknowledgement of that, knowing that that exists, I think that will go a long way. Kind of like what you said about just having a safe place. I mean, really, people just want to be seen for who they are. That's really what people want. You know, people just want a space for who they are, a respectful space. That's really what this is all about. So, you know, finding that space where that is. I mean, I had a little bit of a freak out too. I thought, oh my goodness, what are we doing? So I'm making my phone calls, I'm doing my run, and I'm thinking, wait, are we really going to talk about this stuff? Because it's hard. And I realized, you know what, having that group of people, having people where it's safe, where they give you a respectful space to just be who you are and explore thoughts. Some of them are crazy. All my thoughts are not well formulated, but that's okay. And being able to, and for me, also calling out the elephant in the room, that's liberating. I really find that important to do, but it's also freeing. Let's talk about the hard stuff. So as I care for myself, even talking about the elephant in the room it feels like self-care to me, actually.
Can I pick up on that?
Yeah.
Before I turn it over? And this is a terrible question, actually, given all you've said. I want you, because I don't think it's necessarily a question, elephant in the room question here, but generally out there, I know it is because I've talked to you about it. And that is, how would you respond to this particular response to what you said so far? Okay, you know, you helped me understand it's different for you. You have to be careful about how we invite this and how we set this up. But look, sorry, you are all quite successful. So is it, I mean, I get that it's different, but is it really all that bad? Gives them that we all manage to be successful. Other women in public who are successful. So I get that, you know, there's discrimination, systemic racism. Again, please don't confuse this from my own point of view, but I want to ask it for you to give you a chance to respond.
It's my decision.
How bad really can it be?
Well, I'll start with just the onlyness. So being the only, it's lonely being the only one in so many environments. So we experience this often, and I mean, we're all, you know, yes, we're successful, but we experience this still in 2021 in boardrooms, in employers, in educational settings. We experience this, and for me, I think about my daughter, you know, and all of my kids, my son, my daughters, in being the only one, even in this day and age, that's really hard. So, yeah, we are successful, but there is still, in the success, it makes it very challenging that we still, at this point, have to encounter some of the same things that we're doing. I think about Sheryl Sandberg and Lean in her book years ago. It was only 21% of women who were in CEO positions of large corporate companies. But of that number, there was only 4% of women of color in leadership positions, C-suite positions, not even the CEO positions. And many of them talk about the difficulties that they still experience at that level. not being asked to serve on corporate boards. And most of these women are masters and PhDs. And even with all of the credentialing that these women bring to the table and expertise, they're still not being asked. So yeah, there's some level of success that we may have experienced over our careers and personally, but there's still a tremendous amount of impact that.
I have to ask as a follow-up, do you, maybe you experience it differently, do you experience that as an outward expression of implicit racism, as a kind of suspicion, as a kind of reverting to form or habit? How do you interpret that when you run into it?
I think it's a reverting to habit. I think you have white male leaders around the table, and you go to what, to me, is what you're comfortable with, instead of what is the best opportunity for the company and what is going to most impact the company. And that could be all the great women across the company or people of color across the company that you haven't tapped into that, because you're going with what's familiar. And I think when you go with what's familiar, you don't elevate the company at the highest levels that it could achieve when you don't have that diversity across the board.
You know, I think it's human nature. I mean, I tell my staff, I am the most biased person you're gonna meet, right? Remember that book in the EMBA, Righteous Minds? You know, people don't make decisions with their heads. They make it with their hearts. And we look for data in our intellect to support the decisions that we make in our hearts. I love that book and reread it because it's so true. And that's true for us too. What is familiar is what we gravitate to. And it takes effort. It takes intentionality. It takes a deliberate commitment to saying, I'm going to explore something that I'm not familiar with. And because I'm not familiar with it, I fear it. You know, if you think about even food as an example, you see something that you don't know, and you're like, well, I don't know, I don't want to taste that. What's, you know, it's that same concept. So it's not that bad. I don't know what that actually means and how bad can it be, but it's not that bad. But we know that when there is discussion, disagreements, even discord, those groups are stronger groups. They solve problems better. They are their quality measures are higher. Their cost is lower. We know that. There is so much data around that. You can't even argue that. So aside from it being the right thing to include, you know, people who are different from you, it's kind of fun. You might learn some things about a different country, a different religion, a different culture. Aside from that, economically, business-wise, we know it's the right thing. We know that businesses will not prosper without the diversity in thought that is absolutely critical. So maybe it's not that bad, but it's about the bigger picture.
Yeah, I would turn that around and say, how many opportunities has been missed? I mean, is one enough? Is one Sandra enough? Is one Zoe? Is one Selena enough? And from a business perspective, when we know that the United States is more and more non-white and more purchasing and buying decisions are being made by women, are you future-proofing your organization? Are you, how much quit and stay are you promoting, you know, someone who has decided, okay, I'm going to stay, but I've quit trying. I can't, I'm tired of asking to be in this leadership development program and the answer being no. So I'm going to stay, but I've quit trying. So I guess you can say, well, you're successful, so isn't that, you know, is it really that bad? But Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about how we're all born with different amounts of reserves, and how he, in his experience, was just born with a tremendous amount of reserves to get to where he is today. Not everyone has those same levels of reserves, right? So how many how many people, how many opportunities are missed with that kind of mentality that one is enough. One proves that you're doing as much as you need to do to make your workplace equitable.
Well, and so when I talk about healthcare, health disparities, we know that patient outcomes are better when the care team looks like the patients. We know that, but how, so even the disparities in healthcare, which cost us a lot, which, result in poorer outcomes, we know that exists because in large part of the implicit biases and the fact that our healthcare team does not look like the patients that we serve. So these are really concrete things that we know about the importance of, diversity in the workforce. I sometimes cringe at the word diversity because it's kind of become a overused word, but I haven't found a better word to replace it with, so I continue to use it. But.
Questions? You're sitting on.
Sandra, you made a comment, I think Zoe you did too, early on in your talks about an organization that modeled or practiced. And Sandra, you used the phrase like, why did I leave that place? And then you were recruited to this other bank. As you look back and you compare those two, what were the tangible things, or maybe they aren't even tangible? What were the differences that stuck out, that were so apparent to you as you lived them, as an illustration of comparing and contrasting those two organizations and their approach toward offering opportunities or being open to different opportunities, maybe?
I would say the main organization that I left had a culture of sponsoring or sponsorship versus opposership. Opposer. Instead of being an opposer, they were sponsors. And I think back to my mentors, those people who were allies for me there, those who were a sponsor for me there. So often those sponsors were talking about me when I wasn't in the room, and they were investing in my future. And I remember, for me, I had to work at that too, building those relationships. But I remember I came into work one day, and our president was there with my mentor, who happened to be my boss. She was the regional district manager. And they said, we've heard what you desire to do, and we have a plan to send you through this commercial lending training. Now, I was already a vice president and pretty far through my career in banking, but they put together this program, took my portfolio, had some other team members manage it while I went off and did this training, because they were investing in my future, because they heard me. They heard the times that I went to them and just sat with them during, they were listening, and they were listening intentionally. And I think about Salesforce Salesforce, the company, talks about allyship, and they talk about it in 4 phases and how they've implemented it in their company. They say, ask about their journey, listen, show up, and speak up. And when you're talking about ask about someone's journey, and these are the roses of this company, had a lot of roses, but even Salesforce, these are some of the roses versus the thorns. When you're asking about people's journey, you're not asking them to share, unveil all of their hurt that they've experienced. You're doing that work. You're making that simple investment through that, asking folks about their journey. So you can ask, but you're also doing the learning. And once listening intently and showing up like Dick and Michelle in India did for me in my life, and speaking up when you see injustices happening in the workplace.
It is imperative. It is imperative, not just in the workplace, in settings. You gotta speak up. And you just gotta make that determination in your heart and not your head, because if you see your head, you're gonna just run away from it. But in your heart, just make that determination that when I see injustices, when I see inequality, I'm gonna speak up. And so I love that Salesforce has really integrated that into their culture. And I really feel like the bank that I was at was mirroring those types of things. I hope that answered your question.
You did. I think, so what you're really saying is that culture was shaped right from the leadership of that organization, because that
Yes.
the president was intentional, or the CEO was intentional in their actions, in their listening.
Yeah, and they actually had affinity groups for African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. They had affinity groups that people can go to, and the CEOs and the regional presidents in the C-suite there, they invested. They didn't just say, you guys go, but they would show up at those meetings and they were present because they valued what was taking place. They valued the communities that they were establishing for those groups. That was very apparent at that bank versus the other bank. They had not even gotten to that level. They didn't even have a DEI policy. I uncovered when I arrived. So they were so behind the scenes for a bank their size.
I would say, I would really echo what Sandra said, that, at Steelcase, we talk all the time about bringing your full self to work. That when you're not covering for your marital status, for your sexual orientation, for your ethnicity, you bring all of those parts of you that create breakthroughs, right, and new ideas. And so culture is huge. I think we also have a culture of, we talk about creating more autonomy, giving employees more autonomy to make decisions. And so it's very empowering to work for an organization that encourages you to lead from where you are, regardless of your title, and to bring your full self to work.
There was a question from the audience. If you were sitting down with a young woman of color, somebody leaving school, about to enter the workforce, and obviously it sounds like choosing your company carefully would be one of those, but maybe you don't have the full range of options that you would like. Is there something about your own experiences that you would pass on to that person?
I would say that I would share that for a long time I kept my head down, and I just lived through some really rotten experiences. And when I learned to start speaking up, my daily quality of life improved. I was terrified, but I led with two things. One, that you can have a conversation with almost anyone. You can approach almost anyone and say, I just want to have a conversation. If you lead that way, because no one wants to be raged at, right? If you can approach anyone and say, I'd just like to have a conversation. And if you even say, I might fumble this. I'm really nervous and this is hard for me and I might fumble this, but this is what I want to talk about. You can really, especially when you're so new and so entry level, there are people who will listen. Most people are willing to hear you out. So I would say, as terrifying as it is, as the thought of being a single mom, which I am, and losing a job that you need, and that we know that single moms of color don't just support themselves, right? There's often other people that we're supporting, and that was true for me. That your daily quality of life improves when you speak up.
I would also say that, it's a proceed with positive intent. You want to speak up, absolutely. I think that that's critical. And you got to know how to do that, right? And it doesn't matter what you look like. If you don't speak up with the right communication skills, you're not going to get what you want. The communication is not a soft skill, that's core competency. So no matter what job you're in, having those strong communication and relationship skills is absolutely critical. Speaking up, no doubt, absolutely critical. And also assuming positive intent. That's critical too. And some that may seem, and that's not me saying pretend like all of these issues don't exist. I think that there's a lot of people who operate, with ignorance, not in a bad way. They just don't know. And if you can tell them your truth in a way that they can hear it, I would say most people want to hear that. They're probably doing something that they don't even recognize that that's what they're doing. It's kind of insidious. So speak up, have strong communication skills, know how to develop those relationships, and then assume positive intent. Sometimes you're going to come up with people who just don't have positive intentions, and then that will happen too. But from the beginning, that's where I would say start.
Can I add one more thing to that? I would say, it's along those same lines, saying, I use this phrase a lot. I just want to share with you what this looks and sounds like from my point of view. So you might not, you probably don't know this, but I just want to tell you what this feels like from my point of view. And that in that way, because sharing feedback, especially when it's really emotional, in a way that harms you, that doesn't do you any good. So those are some of the techniques I've used. I just want to have a conversation.
That's great.
And I want to share with you what this feels like from my point of view.
Can you think of an example, example off the top of your head where you, or any one of the three of you have used, where maybe somebody well-intentioned but ignorant has crossed some boundary?
I had an experience where a manager that I worked for, how do I say this? I want to be careful. We were having a difficult conversation, and I was saying, it seems like this is a really good opportunity for me, and this is like the right moment in this organization to put me in this management position. And there were a number of reasons he had, and he was, how do I say this? There had been, there was a pay equity audit that came up, and he was taking credit for all of the good things he'd done for me, including this pay raise. And I was able to say, can you see from my point of view how that maybe didn't feel like a raise? I mean, a pay equity audit means that someone else in the organization asked you to justify why I was behind my peers. Can you understand from my point of view why it's tough for me to give you credit for that? I don't know if that's maybe a garbled example.
No,
that's
not really. Makes sense. I would just add just a couple more things to a young person coming into a workplace. I love a voice, and I think oftentimes we have to sometimes invest in ourselves. So when you don't get investment, find a way to invest in yourself. And one of those ways that you can invest in yourself is with mentorship and sponsors. So oftentimes you're not going to find someone that may look like you. In my career, I was able to find one person, and she was a tremendous mentor for me. But I also had a white male, at the bank who was my mentor, the president, and several white females too, that were mentors of mine. So some of those I've had to ask, to come alongside and for mentorship. But you have to invest in yourself for your success long term. And it helps to develop that voice when you hear that feedback is really, really important. And, asking a male to mentor you, and you may think, well, a man mentoring me. Well, yeah, I learned a lot from a couple of my male mentors and who and some are sponsors. So having a diverse group of mentors and sponsors is really important to your success.
We're coming down to the end of time. Unless there's one more question. I'll ask one last one if you don't mind. Do you think in terms of what you wish the rest of this new, in terms of the piece of it that's exhausting, is part of that walking that fine line between finding a voice, having poor communication skills, and yet not coming across as the quote angry Black woman, especially. That's the cliche or stereotype that I hear so often in various industries. You know, there's still a tendency. Kamala Harris, obviously, just had to stare down that particular stereotype. And are you conscious of navigating that on some regular basis, or are we past that?
Not at all the time.
Yeah, I think so often we're in this dualism, code switching that women of color have to operate in, and being one way in a work setting or a class setting or a board setting, and then really being able to release and be yourself with your community, right? And so we have learned to have that dual, that code, be able to switch in those ways when we've had to do that to be able to protect ourselves and create safety for us. I would love, it's exhausting to do that. But one of the areas that I've been able to grow in is even when I'm speaking, at some point, man, my real self come out. And I am a woman who was born on the east side of Detroit in a city, and that is who I am. And I am unapologetic about it. And so that is me. And although I love West Michigan, I love and appreciate what I learned from where I grew up, because it taught me, that's really where I pulled my strength from, right? From my parents, from where I grew up, and that's who I am. So you code switch, but at some point in our lives, hopefully women can really just walk into their authentic selves.
And just to piggyback on that, look, I'm not going to be exactly the same way I am at home that I am going to be at work, whether I'm a man, woman, it doesn't matter, right? There's just appropriate settings to do certain things. But I would say, know who you are and do not apologize for being that person. That doesn't mean that you don't tailor how you respond, but do not apologize for who you are, what your journey has been. Whatever that takes to settle into that identity and be proud of it, no matter what it is. I think, and if somebody says they're angry, I think you can maybe use some of what you said. Let me tell you how that's feeling like to me. When you call me or you think that I'm angry because of this, let me tell you how that feels to me. Using some of those skills, but don't apologize for
Absolutely, I'd say absolutely be honest, because when you're not honest, it comes back. Whatever. We don't have time for it today, but day one at a particular employer, I had an experience where my response was yes when it should have been no, and that haunted. It never went away. So be honest.
I respect everybody's time. Thank you so much for coming in.